The girl looked at the priest in front of her with confusion. The priest was praying while slowly reaching toward her thigh. The girl was shocked. She helplessly looked at the assistant next to her, but the assistant closed his eyes as if nothing was wrong. After finishing his prayer, the priest was ready to gift the girl's family a house. Her family was very grateful and left happily. Only the girl hesitated at the back, looking behind her in confusion. Sure enough, the priest was staring at her expressionlessly. It turned out that the girl's family had to flee to the countryside because her father went bankrupt in business. Unable to find accommodation although they were struggling, they were still happy to be together as a family. But what they didn't know was that a bigger nightmare was about to unfold. A cult priest from the countryside had set his sights on them. This led to the strange scene at the beginning. When the girl returned home, she told her family that those people were strange and asked if they could refuse the house. But her father and brother were fond of the offer. The girl didn't know what else to say. The next day, the priest really gave them the house. As the family happily toured the place, her father even smiled for the first time in a long while. The girl stayed silent. But can anything in this world truly be free? After unpacking, the assistant said they had to attend church activities. Her father insisted that the children go help them, but the girl, haunted by her earlier experience, tried to refuse. Yet her father, overwhelmed by the house, insisted they go. The girl helplessly looked at her father and reluctantly got into the church's car. The church gave them the task of handing out flyers. But in the car, the assistant started probing her again. The girl didn't know how to respond and could only start handing out flyers with her brother. But something unexpected was about to happen. Her brother, who had a disability. Limping, the brother was heading to the bathroom but accidentally bumped into a thug on the way. The thug, seeing his timid and awkward demeanor, became interested and called his group to surround him. They closed the door and began to assault him. After a while, the brother came out with a blank expression. The sister looked at him with concern, but the brother said it was nothing. However, as twins, the sister could instantly tell something was wrong. After saying goodbye convinced, the next day she arrived at a school in the suburbs to register. She says her name is Sang Mai. That's right, the girl's name was Sang Mai, and her thick Seoul accent immediately drew cheers from the class. On the other hand, her brother Sang Jin wasn't having such a good time. The bullies who had tormented him yesterday were now targeting his classmates. Yes, he was the school bully. Trembling, Sang Jin opened the note from the bully, which simply read 4 words. Followers surrounded him. The nearby students quickly moved away. The bully continued helping him with his food and even added some extra ingredients to it. After that, the bully ordered Sang Jin. They then dumped the food onto his head. Sang Jin's mind went completely blank. The bully grabbed his hair and father. Not wanting to provoke trouble, the sidekick stopped the bully, and they left, hurling threats as they went. Afterward, Sang Hwan checked on Sang Mai, who quickly thanked him and left. After school, as Sang Mai and Sang Jin were about to head home, they were stopped by the assistants of the cult. Sang Mai boarded the car with a blank expression. This time, the cult wanted to give them some rare medicinal herbs. However, after her last unsettling experience with the cult priest, Sang Mai felt uneasy. Sang Mai didn't dare to talk about these so-called benefits, so she had no choice but to accept them. Meanwhile, Sang Jin was praying at the cult, asking why he was so inadequate. This gave the priest the perfect opportunity to step in, comforting Sang Jin and promoting the cult's teachings. On the other side, Sang Mai, holding the medicinal herbs, realized her brother was missing and decided to search for him inside the church. Upon entering, she noticed plastic sheets covering the hallways, and strange cries echoed from deep within the church. As Sang Mai prepared to investigate further, a hand suddenly grabbed her. Terrified, she turned to see the assistant, explaining that she was looking for her brother. As the assistant explained, he slowly approached Sang Mai, leaving her frozen in fear. Before leaving, the assistant even invited her to join in the prayers next time. Sang Mai, full of fear, returned home. Her parents were delighted with the gifts from the church, saying they must help the church more often, unaware that danger was looming. The next day, after school, Sang Mai couldn't find her brother. Hearing hints along the way, she immediately pleaded with them to help. The friend was ready to assist after hearing what was happening, but Sang Hwan hesitated. His father was running for district mayor and had specifically warned him to stay out of trouble. Reluctantly, he let go of Sang Mai's hand and walked away, leaving her confused. With no other option, Sang Mai charged up to the rooftop alone. Upon arrival, she saw her brother being forced by the bully to kneel. Her brother desperately urged her to leave and went blank, and Sang Hwan arrived at that moment. Sang Mai looked at the male lead with despair. Soon after, they were all taken to the police station, including Dong Chul. Sang Jin was rushed to the hospital, but no one could save someone whose spirit had already died. Meanwhile, the bully's father stormed into the police station, angrily berating the chief. The chief quickly were promptly released, with the police even bowing as they left. Sang Jin was labeled as a mentally ill patient who had attempted suicide, while Dong Chul, who had no connections or background, was treated as the perpetrator of violence. He was interrogated for a full day and night before finally being released. When he returned to school, his teacher informed him, "You've already been expelled by the principal." Sang Hwan immediately stood up and started defending Dong Chul, arguing with the teacher. However, Dong Chul, knowing that without any connections his fate was already sealed, stood up and prepared to leave. Dong Chul replies, "What about your father? Did you forget about him?" After repeatedly mentioning Sang Hwan's father, Dong Chul finally left. That evening, the bully leader and his gang were out strolling, just like any other day. They were all smiles, as if nothing had happened the day before. Dong Chul, who had been drinking, happened to see them. In a flash, he rushed towards the bully leader, who had just separated from his gang, unaware that Dong Chul had been watching him. The next moment, the leader was dragged under a bridge by Dong Chul. Dong Chul tried to force him to confess, but he refused and fought back. However, he was no match for Dong Chul and was quickly knocked to the ground. He tried to use his father's influence to intimidate Dong Chul, but Dong Chul wasn't afraid anymore. Taking advantage of a distraction, he kicked sand into Dong Chul's face and charged at him, but it didn't break Dong Chul's defenses. Soon, Dong Chul had him pinned to the ground. Dong Chul, seeing his state, decided to let him go. However, on their way back, the leader, seeing an opportunity while Dong Chul wasn't, and the male lead, who has just arrived, pulls Dong Chul away to leave. The bully struggles, relieved he's okay. Meanwhile, the bully crashes into a stone and is left unconscious. His father soon arrives at the hospital, only to be told that while his life is saved, his spine is severely injured, making it difficult for him to walk in the future. The Sang Hwan's father, who is preparing to run for district head, hears the news and quickly finds the local police to clear his son's name. He decides to shift all the blame onto Dong Chul and warns his son not to testify in court, as it could affect his campaign. He assures his son that once he becomes district head, he will get Dong Chul out. The male lead felt unsure about what to do, and soon, Dong Chul's trial began. Just as expected, the male lead did not show up. Without any witnesses in his defense, Dong Chul was easily sentenced to 3 years in prison. As Dong Chul was being taken to the juvenile detention center, lead's father successfully became the district chief, and teachers and classmates warmly welcomed the male lead. Meanwhile, Dong Chul was confronted by an older inmate in the juvenile center, who led a group of others in initiating new arrivals. Dong Chul was quickly grabbed and beaten. However, the old man's words provoked Dong Chul. Furious, Dong Chul kicked down his attackers, and in an instant everyone backed off, startled by his strength. 3 years passed, and the male lead was now studying law at Seoul National University. One day, he returned to his hometown because it was the day Dong Chul was being released. Feeling guilty, the male lead wanted to see him. Sang Mai is shown. She then got into a black car, but as the driver turned onto an unfamiliar narrow path, Sang Mai realized something was wrong. Sang Mai anxiously asked where they were going. Curly-haired guy's response made her even more nervous. At that moment, a utility knife dropped from the car. Realizing she couldn't just sit there and wait, Sang Mai grabbed the knife and told her brother to hold on tight. Curly-haired guy remained clueless, and Sang Mai took the opportunity to stab the driver. The vehicle immediately lost control, but curly-haired guy quickly grabbed the steering wheel, trying to regain control. He then turned around and slapped Sang Mai. As curly-haired guy attempted to grab Sang Mai again, she pierced his hand with the knife. Overcome with pain, curly-haired guy lost the ability to move, and the car veered off the road, flipping 360 degrees. All 4 passengers were knocked unconscious. Sang Mai was the first to wake up and, after quickly assessing the situation, unbuckled her seatbelt and woke up her brother. Curly-haired guy was no longer responsive, so Sang Mai seized the chance to crawl out of the car and ran away with her brother. However, being the villain, curly-haired guy wasn't out of the picture yet. After gathering himself, the driver angrily declared he would kill them, but curly-haired guy stopped him and began to slap the driver in frustration. Then curly-haired guy looked in the direction where Sang Mai had escaped. Meanwhile, Sang Mai stopped to catch her breath, exhausted from helping her brother. After reassuring him, she set off again. Just as she called her brother to follow her, curly-haired guy had already captured him. Sang Mai's face was filled with fear as curly-haired guy calmly approached and kicked her to the ground. At that moment, the sound of an approaching train alarmed her. She quickly shouted for her brother not to come closer. The driver, however, loosened his grip on her brother, who rushed towards Sang Mi. Unfortunately, he was struck by the oncoming train and sent flying. Sang Mi collapsed in despair, but a hand suddenly pulled her back to reality. Curly-haired guy took her back to his cult. In the car, Sang Mi, feeling hopeless, handed over her phone. The female assistant then took her to meet the priest. When they entered the room, Sang Mi's father was already waiting, having been brainwashed by the cult. Sang Mi thought she had found a savior and was about to cry for help, but her father began blaming her for attacking curly-haired guy. Realizing her father had lost his mind, she was soon met by the priest, who comforted her. Suddenly, her father knelt and begged the priest to forgive Sang Mi. She understood her alone. The cult members quickly reacted, and Sang Mi ran to the roadside, successfully flagging down a police car. She finally let out a sigh of relief. Unbeknownst to her, the cult had already established connections with the local police. A quick phone call alerted the officers. When the police arrived and questioned Sang Mi, she mentioned the cult, realizing she had walked into a trap. Instantly, she broke down, calling for help. Sure enough, when she reached the police station, the cult was already waiting for her. Her father rushed over, and the police sighed with relief upon seeing him. The cult's two assistants chatted amiably with the officers. Her father then prepared to take Sang Mi away, but she refused, desperately grabbing breakdown. The police suggested the cult manage Sang Mi better in the future, warning her about the dangers of running away. Feeling helpless, Sang Mi turned to her father for support, pleading for him to wake up. Instead, he began to pray strangely, asking Satan to leave his daughter. As he prayed, he also hit Sang Mi, causing her to lose consciousness. Her father felt a sense of triumph as they loaded her into the car. However, things quickly took a turn. On the way back, the cult accidentally crashed into the motorcycles of the male lead and his friends while driving against traffic. The curly-haired guy initially thought of bribing them, but the male lead wasn't having it. He only wanted an apology. The assistant had to get out, and to his surprise, the male lead saw someone he recognized. It was Sang Mi, his former high school classmate. Since the last time he encountered Sang Mi and her plea for help, the male lead had been eager to find her, but due to an accident, he lost track of her. Now that he saw her again, he was determined to get answers, so he approached her directly. Seeing him made the assistant panic, and he tried to stop Sang Mi, but the male lead pressed on. Frustrated, the assistant told Sang Mi to handle it herself. Remembering the threats from the curly-haired guy, a desperate Sang Mi reluctantly began to talk to the male lead. He asked her what had happened. With hesitation, she nodded, and just then, the assistant, not wanting them to continue their conversation, hurriedly pulled Sang Mi away and jumped into a taxi. However, Sang Mi continued to gaze intently at the male lead, making him realize that things were not that simple. Later that evening, he recalled how he had rejected Sang Mi's plea for help due to his father's election campaign, which had led to her brother's suicide. This regret weighed heavily on him, and he decided that this time he would help Sang Mi. In order to meet Sang Mi alone, the three of them sneaked inside. However, the chubby one accidentally stepped on a metal basin, creating a loud noise that lit up the room. Sang Mi's father had gone mad, planning to give his beautiful daughter to the old man before him as his godmother. Sang Mi looked at her brainwashed father in disbelief, pleading for him not to come closer. But he was entranced, leaving her no choice but to smash a nearby glass and take a shard to protect herself from the approaching demons. The white-haired priest coldly observed, as if everything was under his control. Desperate, Sang Mi, the priest finally stood up and spoke to her, while her foolish father laughed joyfully, unaware of the gravity of the situation, sliced across his face in anger. She intended to continue attacking but was seized by the priest, who struggled to contain his own rage. Recognizing Sang Mi's strong independent will, he resorted to mentioning her mother, triggering memories of her once resilient spirit. The priest seized the opportunity to further torment her mind. For her mother's safety, Sang Mi had no choice but to give up her resistance. Meanwhile, her foolish father began to praise his daughter while her mother had already been brainwashed, urging Sang Mi to pray with the priest for eternal life. Desperate and helpless, Sang Mi silently watched everything unfold, as the demon before her wore a satisfied smile. Just moments ago, Sang Mi's high school classmate Sang Huan had intended to rescue her, but his father discovered the commotion. Hiding on the roof, Sang Huan and his friends were forced to abandon their plan. Still unwilling to give up, Sang Huan thought of a new solution, calling the police. When the police received the report, they quickly arrived, but upon seeing familiar faces, the officer decided to follow the principle of better to avoid trouble than to invite it. After chatting for a while, he left. Sang Huan was left speechless, unsure of what to do next. Suddenly he remembered his old situation. To prevent anyone from ruining his plans, the priest decided to take Sang Mi sooner than expected, which led to the earlier insistence on making her a godmother. On the other hand, soon they were caught up in a scuffle. After a while, both exhausted, they stopped fighting. Finally, they had the opportunity for a good conversation, clearing up past misunderstandings. After easing their relationship, Sang Huan shared Sang Mi's current predicament. The inherently righteous Dong Chul, moved by the suffering of their high school classmate, paused and looked at Sang Huan, contemplating the possibility of returning to help. Meanwhile, Sang Mi found herself facing an unimaginable situation. Her father had taken her to a small, dark room to prevent her from escaping, intending to offer her to the cult priest. Desperate, Sang Mi pleaded with her father not to do this, but all she heard in response was his cold voice. Just as she was losing hope, she heard Sang Huan's voice coming from the window, assuring her that he would come to save her and urging her to wait. This glimmer of hope lifted Sang Mi's spirits. The next day, while the cult was escorting her back to the church, Sang Huan and his friends intercepted them. The three of them approached the cult's vehicle with determination, ready to make a bold move. Seeing this, Sang Mi realized it was her chance to escape. Sang Huan's friends quickly restrained two of them, successfully got into the car, and left smoothly. Sang Huan soon hid Sang Mi at his house, but that didn't solve the underlying problem. The next day, Sang Huan decided to take Sang Mi to the police station. However, the priest received word of their plan and calmly made a phone call. As Sang Huan was explaining the situation to the police, the officer was about to start an investigation when a call came from the station chief. After the call, the officer's attitude changed dramatically. He prepared to call Sang Mi's father. It turned out that her father had reported her missing the previous day. Sang Huan, who had studied law, began arguing with the police, stating that her father was irresponsibility. Sang Huan grew increasingly agitated. Tensions escalated, and she was determined to destroy the entire cult. Sang Mi confronts the priest alone to provoke him and gather evidence. The next day, to make her body more perfect, the priest forces her to drink green juice. After only a little, Sang Mi can't help but vomit. The assistant coldly tells her to keep drinking. After enduring the abuse, a weak Sang Mi is helped to bed. She then takes a small note from the drawer and hands it to a lady, asking her to relay recent information to her friends outside who are preparing to rescue her. The lady is indeed Sang Mi's only friend in the cult. She has been penetrating the cult as a journalist for 2 years. They successfully form a partnership to expose the cult. However, the lady is unaware that her identity was exposed the day before when she was out and was spotted by the assistant, who had been following her, just as she met other journalists. Upon returning to the cult, the assistant coldly watches the lady, unsure of her intentions. That night, Sang Mi's father brings her to pray again. With no hope left, she asks her father if she will have to sleep with the priest after marrying him and becoming the mother goddess. Her father stood up and replied, "That's not sleeping, it's a baptism of redemption." Sang Mi was left speechless. Meanwhile, the lady was preparing to go home when she was stopped and forcibly taken into the washroom. The assistant had been waiting there for a long time. In front of the lady, 2 members wasted no time in taking action. They forcefully shoved the lady's head into the machine, ignoring her struggles. Then the lady was taken to a small dark room and forced to take a mind-altering drug. When the lady regained consciousness, she found herself tied to a bed. Having never seen such a scene before, she immediately began to scream in fear, summoning the cult's assistant. The assistant started to fiddle with her mysterious instruments, and the lady knew that this was not going to end well, shaking her head in denial. The assistant comforted the lady, assuring her that nothing would happen, just as she prepared her instruments. Suddenly, Dong Chul appeared behind, collapsed. The lady was then rescued by Dong Chul. After learning that the lady had been captured, he rushed over to save her. Dong Chul pointed the lady in the direction where she could find help, telling her to go while he stayed behind to rescue Sang Mi. The girl left, feeling relieved. After running for a while, the lady finally saw a car approaching. She felt a surge of hope and waved her hands to signal it to stop. However, as she looked up closely, panic set in when she realized it was another cult assistant, Curly Hair. He hadn't expected to encounter a runaway on his way back. Knowing she was doomed, the lady tried to flee, but Curly Hair grabbed her by the hair and dragged her back. He forcefully pressed her head down, ignoring her struggles. When the girl fell still, Curly Hair revealed a sinister smile. Meanwhile, Sang Huan sensed that something had gone wrong and messaged Dong Chul, suspecting that the reporter was in trouble. Dong Chul, who was entering the cult, noticed that Curly Hair was wearing different clothes than before, which raised his suspicions. He began investigating and secretly went to the laundry room, where he found the clothes that had been changed. Noticing blood on the clothes, Dong Chul realized that the lady must be in trouble. The next day, Sang Huan confronted Curly Hair, detailing what had happened to the lady and revealing that he had a recording from an eyewitness. He claimed that if they found the body he could send Curly Hair to prison. Curly Hair, initially calm, became nervous and attacked Sang Huan, threatening him. However, Sang Huan was prepared. His friends rushed in to pull Curly Hair away. The police arrived just in time, and upon seeing them, Curly Hair feigned innocence, claiming he was a good citizen and couldn't possibly have killed anyone. Sang Huan then played the recording, leading to Curly Hair's arrest. Meanwhile, the priest began holding a wedding ceremony for Sheng Mei to claim her body. In a bid to destroy the cult and expose the priest, Sang Mei decided to cooperate. She knelt down and kissed the priest's hand, a gesture that pleased him. Dressed in a wedding gown, Sang Mei's father watched with a smile as he led her to the priest's chamber, even closing the door behind them, while the priest remarked about the fruit of his labor now in his grasp. The priest instructed Sheng Mei to enter a small room. Once inside, he naturally sat beside her, his hand slowly reaching for her hair. Seeing that Sang Mei didn't resist, his gaze dropped and his hand followed suit. The old man, looking at the bride he had forced, moved his hand downwards. However, Sang Mei's alliance intervened, and she glared at him in anger, but the priest showed no concern. He pushed her down and revealed his true nature, telling her not to resist because the last person who did was already dead. Realizing the priest was a criminal, Sang Mei shouted accusations at him, calling him a murderer. The priest remained silent and delivered a powerful blow. It became clear that he was the leader of the cult, using sweet words to manipulate the parents of any daughter he desired. Sang Mei decided to spread through the gasoline, destroying him. He writhed in pain on the ground, while Sang Mei and Sang Huan ran outside. After a final agonizing scream, the priest was struck down by a burning cross, dying at the scene. Overwhelmed with emotion, Sang Mei felt tears streaming down her face as she realized everything was finally over. They no longer had to run and could walk freely. Soon after, a large number of police arrived to clear out the leftover of the cult. News reports began broadcasting that dozens of bodies had been discovered deep in the mountains, marking the cult's destruction. Sang Mei and her mother settled into a normal life. Meanwhile, Sang Huan was preparing to leave for military service. As he and his friends said their goodbyes, Sang Mei appeared to bid farewell as well. Sang Huan and the others were taken aback, and after a brief exchange, Sang Mei finally smiled. Thanks for watching. Please like and drop a heart to help our channel out.
Former President Donald Trump, and Vice President Kamala Harris shake hands prior to the presidential debate at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia on September 10, 2024. Philadelphia. Americans had a chance to hear from both sides in a debate that saw Vice President Kamala Harris square off against former President Donald Trump for the first time. The September 10th ABC News broadcast from Philadelphia was contentious at times, with both candidates speaking over each other and lobbing personal attacks. No new policy specifics were provided by either candidate, and Trump and Harris presented contrasting visions on the economy, abortion, and foreign policy. After the debate, Republicans in the spin room alleged that moderators David Muir and Lindsey Davis showed bias toward Harris. Former GOP candidate Vivek Ramaswamy described the debate as a 3-on-1 fight against Trump, while Rep. Mike Waltz questioned the fairness of ABC's fact-checking. Democrats, meanwhile, accused Trump of looking defensive against a new and yet familiar candidate. Also in the spin room, California Governor Gavin Newsom said Harris exceeded all expectations. Here are some of the main themes that emerged from the first presidential debate with Harris as the Democratic candidate. Harris distances herself from Biden as Trump links them. While the election previously pitted the former president against incumbent President Joe Biden, Harris sought to carve out her own place while garnering credit for what she characterized as a positive record from her administration. Remember this, she is Biden, Trump said toward the end of the debate. He attributed high inflation and the administration's energy policies to Harris, along with its border policies. Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, Harris said, adding that she would provide a new leadership for our country while touting her administration's record on energy, the economy, and more. Harris's remarks echoed comments earlier in the evening amid a discussion on foreign policy. After saying the world was on the verge of World War III, Trump questioned Biden's fitness for office, asking, "Where is our president? You're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me." Harris said a few moments later. In his closing remarks, Trump focused on Harris's role in the current administration, pointing out that she has had a full term as vice president to implement the changes that she promises to make. She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? Trump said.